Today we're going to share a story with you about one of our students who finally bought a lovely home after learning some very tough, very costly lessons along the way. We'll share how she discovered some of the big past mistakes and got on the right track.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to move it along and become homeowners. But most importantly, it is for you to become an educated home buyer.
I'm Meighan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mum. But it's a good thing because between us we've got over 45 years experience to share with you and bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure you get unbiased and real information you can rely on. Allow us to guide you on your home buying journey. We want you to become an educated home buyer so that you can stop looking for your first home and actually become a proud homeowner.
We've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au, and there you'll get access to our free mini course, How to Price a Property Like a Professional. You will also find the holy grail of home buying education, Your First Home Buyer Guide, the online course for people who want to become educated home buyers. We created this for you to help you get on the right path to home ownership for your first home and beyond.
But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, we've got the boring bit, the disclaimer. You of course know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field who takes the time to understand your personal situation. We've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording. Things change rapidly, so always check with the relevant government authority and your trusted advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today we're sharing the home buying journey of one of our more shy students who didn't want to come onto the podcast herself, but who was very happy for us to share her story, and it is a great story.
It is. And you had a chat to, let's call her Amanda.
Let's call her Amanda. I did have a chat to her, and what Meighan and I are going to do in this episode is essentially read you the transcript of that conversation. So we're going to speak in Amanda's voice, but it's going to be Meighan and I.
And we're not even going to ask her questions. I'm so confused. Anyway, we're going to wing it. I'm sure we'll be fine.
We're going to wing it. We haven't done it like this before, but we will interject because we won't be able to help ourselves. So I'm going to start off as Amanda. It says, she said to me, I'm not strictly a first home buyer, but I haven't owned a home for a very long time. Back in 2004, I first bought a place with my then partner. It was a unit, and I thought I'd done all the great research, reading all about hotspots and where the next big thing was going to be. So we bought in a suburb in Western Sydney, sort of near Homebushy type area. Shocking unit. Oh, actually, the unit itself was quite good. Shocking location. But prior to that...
That's an interesting observation of hers, actually, because we talk about not focusing on hotspots, because often hotspots are where there's what some people call growth. And it might not necessarily be that it's growth in prices. It might be growth in the number of properties.
Yeah. Or in this case, I think what it was actually lower socioeconomic suburb next to suburbs that are quite high socioeconomic. But, you know, in the change, if there was going to be one, like we're talking 20 years later, that suburb still hasn't really had a great change. You know what I mean? So it's like there's this idea of hotspotting is like the next big place. It's like, yeah, one day it might change, but sure as hell didn't in the time she owned that property, and wasn't until she got there, like you say, you look around and you might have a really nice apartment there, but not such a great place to live.
Not the great area. So she then went on to say that prior to that, that almost made a huge mistake.
Oh, yeah. I couldn't believe this. She told me this. So once again, I'm going to go back into Amanda's voice. We went and looked at a property in the St. George area. It was a house and it looked pretty good, and it looked like you could build up and get some views. And we took a friend of ours to have a look, and she said, oh, we should just bid on it.
Oh,
well, I know. I didn't even know this before.
When I read this, I stopped breathing. I really could not. Anyway,
my mouth was like, oh. We hadn't arranged anything. We hadn't organised finance. We hadn't got a building and pest inspection, anything. And we went to this auction, and she said, just bid. She said, I've got my checkbook here. We'll just pay the deposit. So we bid on this property. I'm like,
this is a mistake, everybody. This is a mistake. This is not a piece of guidance.
Not at all.
As Amanda said, this was almost a big mistake. And she goes on to say, we hadn't got finance approval. We hadn't checked anything. We hadn't looked at the contract. We had not done a thing. Anyway, we didn't get it, thank God, because we would have been stuffed, is her word. God. Like she was going to pay a deposit, as in the friend was going to pay the deposit, but we had no finance. Then we had to pay her back. It was the most ridiculous thing. Anyway, we didn't buy it, thank God, but just stupid. Self-reflection there, isn't there?
I know. And it's sort of interesting because
like they've done this and the bullet's gone past them.
Dodged the bullet. As this unfolds, you will see how the realizations have come across or to Amanda's mind over a long period of time. And this is really, really valuable for first home buyers now because there are some mistakes that translated into big differences in terms of where she could have been versus where she was. And this is something, there's so many lessons in this. And we're excited. There's a good happy ending in the sense she's now in a beautiful home.
Yeah.
But, when she revealed this to me, I had no idea. Like, this is just like, whoa. So let's go back to Amanda's story. We would have been 30 or something. And not long after we bought the unit and used the first home buyer grant to do that. Didn't need to buy brand new back then. I remember this. Back 2004 is when it's actually started. And it was only $7,000. I remember that too, right? It was right back when it first started and we didn't have to pay stamp duty either. So that was great. That got us in the market. 2.5 years later, we had 2 kids at that point, so decided to sell up and move back to the suburb where I grew up. So what do you think of that, Meighan?
I think that there was a really quick turnaround here and Amanda goes on to tell us a lot of what she actually experienced from turning that over, selling that property so quickly. She said, well, it was great, got us into the market, they sold the house. They then found a new place. They bought it, didn't have a clue what she was doing when it came to making an offer or anything that was required, like contracts or anything. So this is the second house they've bought, but they still don't really know the process. So we ended up going with a solicitor who was the husband of my partner's boss. He didn't know anything about property. He was terrible. So they've chosen someone they know, but isn't a property expert. And of course, that's a big, big thing on our list is to actually go with someone who is an expert in their field.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. There's a lot of solicitors out there who will happily say, oh, yeah, I'll do the conveyancing for you. But if they don't do a lot of it, if they are not property specialists or accredited property specialists in many cases, they potentially will know no more than you do. Sure, they might be able to read a contract, but they won't even know the red flags or anything. Yeah. And in this particular case too, it's like they had 2 kids in 2.5 years. So surely they must know that was the plan. You know what I mean? So this is the thinking about future you, not just right here, right now.
They were thinking about that longer term picture.
Absolutely. But back to the solicitor who didn't seem to know anything. A few days before settlement, the solicitor asked them for about $15,000 for the stamp duty, and we said, back to Amanda's voice, we said, "What's that?" We had no idea because we didn't have to pay it when we bought the unit with the first home buyer grant. So just days before settlement, we were just ringing around everyone, trying to see if anyone could lend us that money. I had a car loan at the time. I think it was about $7,000 in advance on my repayments. So I pulled that back out. We just scrounging with days to go. It was just ridiculous.
Can you imagine the pressure? Can you imagine that? Because you've got to settle this thing, right? You've got a date that you've got to do it by where the money has to be transferred to the seller.
Yeah. You're going to be homeless because it was a simultaneous settlement to add pressure, because that means that they'd sold their unit and they were going to settle that, and that was going to pass on to the new owner at the same day they were settling on the house they were buying.
Which in itself is stressful. But imagine trying to find the money. You haven't got everything lined up. A really good solicitor, and this is, I guess, the differentiation, a really good solicitor will have told you in advance when things are due, when they need money in the account. You would have been signing all sorts of documents that about when to pay stamp duty and so forth. So the fact that there was a solicitor involved who it wasn't their regular gig meant that they didn't have a process in place to guide the buyer through the purchasing journey.
Yeah.
And that's just so, so important.
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, that all worked out. We moved down, and then 2.5 years later, we split up. So we had to sell that property.
And this is interesting because this is where she really gets introspective.
Yeah.
And reflective.
This is really actually quite fascinating. And after such a short period of time, we didn't walk away with too much. It was just after the GFC.
So it's sounding like there wasn't much capital growth going on there.
Oh, there's a little bit of capital growth after all the costs and everything. What she said was that they ended up with about 20 grand each, and then and they basically used that to set themselves up in a new home because they need furniture. You know what I mean? Split up, you need to buy. But this is an interesting parallel, right? Because, and once again, I didn't know any of this. Back into Amanda's voice. My sister, she also separated from her partner at the same time. She lived in the same street, and she held her house. Like, they came to some agreement that he stayed there, paid the rent, etc. And the difference between where we ended up years later, when her eldest kid finally finished school and when they sold, versus my partner and I selling when we split, there were hundreds of thousands of dollars difference in terms of how far ahead they were compared to us, because they held onto the property for long enough to make capital gain and delay incurring those selling costs, etc. In hindsight, because we had a very amicable relationship, my ex and I, we could potentially have come up with a similar arrangement.
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's a direct parallel. Let's assume it's a reasonably direct in terms of the properties, and what the difference is in your financial situation when you take a long-term view of property and you hold it for the long term, versus being out of the market for a period of time where the market continues to grow. It must have been completely, it really must have been disheartening for Amanda to be in that situation and to see with a little bit of, compromise. And I'm sure it wasn't the easiest thing to continue to own a property together after you're separated. But if you're in a situation where you can do that, that's actually been really beneficial for her sister.
And the kids too, you think, because they're basically, that means the kids got to stay in the place and continue in schooling. And there's, so there are lots of, and again, it's in hindsight, you can sort of sit back and think, you know what, we put ourselves under so much pressure at the time, but we probably didn't need to. Now we sort of step back and step away from it. We get to see things with a bigger, more scope, and so, and there's some, I just thought there's some really wonderful lessons in this.
And a lot that our listeners can take away, because it can be a really emotional time if there is a separation. And we're talking to you about potentially buying your first home, but your things can change down the track, and there are other options. And I guess the lesson out of this one is to kind of have you might have an emotional journey to go through if you do go through a separation, but you can also think very strategically and financially. If you can put some of the emotion aside and think about, well, can you get straight back into the market in something that's comparable out of the settlement? And if not, is there a way of holding onto it so that you have an asset, if it's in a good location, that is continuing to have capital growth and therefore adding to your future wealth?
Yeah. And you know what's amazing too, because Amanda started really educating herself, about 10 years ago. I'm jumping ahead here, but And by educating herself about property in terms of what her next move was ultimately going to be, that's when she started sort of looking back, thinking, we just made crazy decisions and just didn't know where to go, what to do. So you're listening to this podcast.
That was the best at the time.
Well,
but didn't have any other information to use to draw on.
No, I mean, but what I'm saying to you listeners is you are already ahead of the game. You're here listening to this stuff. You're already setting yourselves up to make better decisions, which is fantastic, right? Now, continuing in Amanda's voice.
To say. Okay. But I guess people think, you split up and you did the thing that you did, and we both ended up renting. So I was renting. I was really lucky that I got a property that had a really good landlord. Tick. I was there for 13 and a half years. I kind of had resigned myself to the fact that I was just going to rent forever. And I guess a lot of people do feel like when they're there and it's comfortable and they haven't got to move, it's like, well, why rock the boat when it's calm and the kids are happy and settled? But it's also putting that financial future lens on, and this is where things started to really shake up for Amanda.
Yeah, so back to Amanda's voice, it was all fine, it's fine. I was in a good place, had a good landlord, happy where I was. And then my mother got really frail and ended up having to go into a nursing home, and we had to sell her property to pay for her bed. And it just occurred to me, the penny dropped at that point. I thought, shit, she's going to a nursing home and we're going to have to sell her property to pay for that.
Yeah.
What happens if I'm renting at that age? Yeah. And I just thought, oh, no, can't do this. I've got to buy. So COVID hit and I had about 15K in debt in terms of my daughter's braces and a car loan. So I just plowed everything into that, got rid of that debt and just chucked as much as I could into the bank, saving up basically, because I had been contributing to super. So she actually re-diverted money that she'd been putting into super into saving for a deposit. And what is so amazing is that, you know, the light bulb went off and then it was like massive motivation.
Yeah. And also massive, almost education, right? What do I need to do differently? Okay, I know that I've got a goal now. I know I want to buy a house. I need to change what I'm doing. I need to look at every aspect of where my money's going. And I know I need to focus on that goal. Yep. And, it changed quite a lot to be able to do that.
Gotcha.
Back to Amanda, she says,
so I stopped paying into super, just poured everything into the deposit and just saved like crazy for a couple of years, 3 years too, so that I could get a deposit together. And then, of course, the single parent deposit guarantee came out, which offered the federal government had this scheme which offers no lender's mortgage insurance on
if you got less than,
if you had a 2% deposit, tiny, right? Which in the end she saved up to 7% deposit. So basically it all worked out. But that was also helped. That was an impetus for her. And she's a really good example of somebody who could take advantage of that.
Yeah, it was perfect for her. Now, she goes on to say, I've always liked the bush and I love to be in nature. So I looked at a place down at Bellambi where I could pick up a townhouse pretty cheap. I don't know if you know much about Bellambi, she says. It's in Illawarra. It's a beach suburb. So its entire frontage of the water is all department housing. And this townhouse came up a couple of blocks back. And I thought, will it go? Like at some point, will it go? These social houses will either get sold off and the market will take off. Yeah. But will it be in my lifetime is what Amanda says.
Yep.
And it had a high crime rate and socioeconomically, it wasn't a great area.
So I just thought this is such a gamble because potentially that could be a fantastic location, maybe in a few decades, but not now. So I looked at the townhouse and then I realised, I don't want to live down there.
It wasn't the right compromise.
That's it. I had to think about where my daughter was going to school and also that I was working up in Sydney. So I started looking around anything in either the Illawarra or the Sutherland Shire, had a really broad range, but I obviously had to be close enough to a train station for my daughter and all that sort of stuff. So she ended up buying a unit, right, which was off market, and it was sold by the real estate agent who actually sold a mother's home.
Yeah. He had this listed and he contacted me, again, I'm in Amanda's voice, because I'd signed up to all the real estate databases. And when I first looked through, I had a really good feeling because as soon as you walk in, you just see trees. It's like this big, beautiful tree out the back. So lovely outlook, really pleasant. I can imagine that feeling. I've seen it with clients in the buyer's agency business, that feeling when you walk into a place and go, this feels like home.
Yeah. And I also know that area, there's a lot of units in that particular area, and to get that outlook is really unusual.
Yeah, instead of looking at another block of units.
Yeah. And so continue on with Amanda's voice, and just a whole lot of greenery, and I really liked it. It was ground floor, which was not too good security-wise, but it had a gate so I could walk straight out into this little reserve area, which made it feel a bit more like a villa as opposed to a unit, and I felt like I could get out. The owner...
Grass under your feet. It's something that people really appreciate.
But she'd got a little dog too. But the owner was just not budging on the asking price. So I kept looking at units in other suburbs and I just kept thinking every time I looked at them, do I really want to live here? Do I really want to live in a block with 40 to 100 units or whatever? And I just kept saying no.
Do you remember we had campfire, and I think back then it might have been that they were asking questions. It actually wasn't live face to face. We were live, but we had questions from people, and she'd be typing away madly trying to get her questions across to us. Found this one, it's ground floor, and asking all sorts of really good questions because she'd done the course, of course, and she was asking the right questions.
And also, when talking about campfires, Amanda was coming along to Campfire every week, and also she was sending us information about what she'd been working through in her pricing of this property. And so, I know the area enough to basically be able to sort of guide her and give some guardrails there. And so her thinking was good and her rationale was good. And so she could tell that the owner was overpriced. And so, look, we'll explain it as this moves forward, but we were there to guide her and also be her sounding board so that when she'd sort of bring her research to us and we'd be like, yep, that you're on the right track, right? You're thinking the right way. And so she had the confidence to continue. And as she was looking around these other properties, she kept saying, look, I didn't want to live in those locations that were really close to the highway or really close to rundown units. It's funny because I never thought I'd be that fussy because I worked in community housing for the first half of my career. So homelessness and my values around that have always sat really tight with me. Like everybody's entitled to a roof over their head. But I was amazed at how fussy I became doing your course. It also made me realize where my mistakes were made the first time around and how I wasn't fussy enough back then.
And now it's like when I was looking, I was ruling out so many things. And I think I said to Meighan once, constantly had you guys on my shoulder saying, no, there's too many in that one. That one's not good. There's too many units in this suburb, and all the rest of it, all of the advice that she was getting, she actually had us sitting, in her mind on her shoulders. And Amanda said, I kept coming back to this one, eventually bought it. It was bloody hard though. The owner was not negotiating.
No,
she
exactly
was,
right.
Yeah, she was just not budging, and she was overseas at the time of the contract exchange. So trying to get signatures on that contract when she was in a different time zone and not really accessible, it was a nightmare.
So this one, it was off the market for about a week and a half, and the agent knew that she was interested, but he also had somebody else who'd put in an offer, and he came back, going back to Amanda's voice, he came back to me and said, look, I'm just going to be really honest with you because I knew him quite well because he sold Mum's property, so I'm going to be really honest with you. She's not budging. Like he actually shared her texts with me. Like he was really getting frustrated too. And he said, if you don't hit this number, then it's going to market. Actually, sorry, the vendor said, if you don't hit this number, it's going to market. And I said, that's fine. Put it on the open market and I'll keep looking. And if it's still there and she wants to sell and I haven't found something better, then I'll come back, but take it to the open market.
Yeah, let it go. And that was the thing. She was prepared to walk away because she'd done her research. So Amanda said, and I thought, I'm not going to be bluffed by her. So it went to the open market. In the end, I think it was on the market for about 3.5 weeks or something. And I was always just hanging around, but never committing to anything while she wasn't going to budge. And in the end, he pushed it through. The agent pushed it through. Amanda was in a training conference that day. She says, I was in my lunch breaks and tea breaks trying to negotiate this deal with him. And eventually it got over the line on that day.
So huge relief. And so we were with her in the background, through this. So we're certainly very familiar with this whole process. But what she really then looked back on the past 20 years. So it was like 19 years since she bought that first property by the time she bought this. And she could really see how her mindset had changed. And this is what she said. She said, there's this psyche in Australia that you just got to get in the property market, then you'll be fine. And then when you do that and you go, actually, but I wasn't fine. Like, how come it didn't do what it's meant to do? I guess I've been wanting to buy for probably about the last 10 years or so, but it was just a thought in the back of my head. I wasn't really committed to it. But then the penny dropped when Mum went into the nursing home. I've always been someone who likes to learn. So at some point, I stumbled across the Elephant in the Room podcast, and I think that's what led me to your first home buyer guide.
Yeah. Yay. She found us. Woohoo. So she says, I was listening to the podcast, and because I'd been through the process twice, I felt like I knew a lot of what you were saying. And I felt like even though I hadn't done those things, I recognised the mistakes. So it kind of just confirmed what I'd already thought about. So I bought and sold 2 properties within 5 years. Wow. The second one was just because of a breakup. The first one was just dumb. We should have bypassed that whole first step and bought the house in the first place.
So she'd been listening to the podcast episodes and back into her words, Amanda says, I'd done some of your mini courses, doing the course was always in the back of my mind. So it's the first home buyer guide, the full course. And then I decided to bite the bullet when you sent around an email about beating the price rise. So about just over a year ago, we upgraded the course. We put the price up, and she jumped in and took advantage and saved herself, I think, about $100. And back to her words, and I'm glad I did it, because I think back then when I first started, it was $890 or something. Now it's $990, just so you know. And then it went up. So for $890, I well and truly saved that. And what I can say with absolute confidence is that I didn't have a clue how to make an offer before. Like when I done it before, I was so nervous. I was so scared. I was reading real estate books, still didn't have an idea. Like I was reading John McGrath's book at one point, and he said, put the offer in writing. So I put it in writing. I got laughed at by the real estate agent. And he said, that's not what you do. Just give us a call.
I don't necessarily agree with that either. I'm probably on John's side with that one.
The point being, though, if you read a book, just put your offer in writing. It's missing all the lead up to what offer do you put in writing. Do you know what I mean?
And what conditions you put there, and how do you make it, and what makes it attractive. Yeah. But Amanda says, but this time around, when I made the offer on this place, I felt so comfortable and so confident that I never would have felt like that before had I not done the course. I really felt that I'd been led through a path and knew how to do it. And I love that, because that is exactly what we're about.
Exactly. And also, she says, to be able to hold my ground, like say, no, I've done the research and I've compared all the properties that are sold around here, and I actually gave the comparables to the owner, to the real estate agent, and said, this is what I'm looking at. This ain't worth that. So I felt confident doing that. I wasn't nervous. I guess because I was also looking at other properties at the same time, and I just thought, no, I've had all the education. I've spoken to you and Meighan, and it's definitely worth what I've offered. So, and I think that that's really great, because she did. She really went carefully through the price research. Yep. She really thought through the scarcity factor, the fact that this apartment had that outdoors, access to outdoor space, and that sense
greenery.
Of greenery, yeah. And she did pay at the very top end of what she felt it was worth. I mean, there's no bargains here, but she was prepared for that because of her own research. And the vendor did end up coming down a bit in price.
Absolutely. And we were so proud. It was such a journey, and working with particularly people who are on their own, making these decisions on their own, having that sounding board, I think, was the thing that I really enjoyed working with Amanda on this. And she stuck true to Homebuyer Academy property principle, which is don't let the process of the negotiation interfere with the goal of the property if it's the right property. And she was so true to that. She was prepared to walk away, but she wasn't prepared to walk away just because it was difficult. And she saw it through, and she got the outcome.
She was patient. And, and I just love that confidence, and the fact that she was her earlier property decisions, which is so ad hoc, so random, so, but to be so measured and so deliberate and so careful and intentional, and then get there at the end, and she's now in her home. She's been there nearly 6 months.
Loves it.
It's just great. And it's really nice after 13 and a half years renting, after having been a homeowner. So we're delighted to have been able to help you. And thank you, because I know Amanda listens to the podcast still. And thank you, Amanda, for trusting us and for being diligent and doing the work, and then getting
and sharing your experience with everybody else, because there are other people who are listening to this, no doubt, who have been through a similar thing where they've bought something and they're realising their mistakes, but they're realising they can do something about it. There is a pathway forward. There is a future. Just because you got it wrong the first time doesn't mean you can't get it right the second time, the third time. Or if this is your first time, there's a lot of lessons here that you can pick up, that you can take with you on your journey to that first home. So a quick note, you might think that we cover everything you need to know in these podcasts, but a word of warning, we do not. We just scratch the surface here. If you really want to be an educated first home buyer, you need to learn all of the steps and how to do everything in the right order.
Our first home buyer guide course only costs $990, and you get direct access to us to help guide you through the negotiations, as we did with Amanda. You can also share the link of any property you're thinking of buying, and we can help you work out whether it's A, B or C grade or a no-go zone. And again, we did that with Amanda. Trust us. We're real estate agents. You will buy better with our guidance, and you'll overpay by a hell of a lot more than $1,000 if you don't know what you're doing.
In this episode, we've only touched on a tiny part of the huge amount of things you need to know to become an educated first home buyer. There is so much more for you to do. You can learn all of the steps in the right order and avoid all of the mistakes that others have made in our 10-step online course for first home buyers.
If you'd like to learn more about the right process and avoid making rookie errors, become an educated home buyer. Head over to the website, check out your first home buyer guide, the course that we have created for you. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you've liked what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. It helps other people find us. And of course, I know it's a bit cringy, but we're going to ask for 5 stars. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. We hope you've found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with more priceless stuff.